We are a church that is here to help people find and follow Jesus. We don't always get it perfect, and we want to be a family that is continually striving to look more and more like Jesus in our relationships, especially talking about relationships today. Because we're a family, we love to celebrate, and so one celebration that I want us to make us aware of is Celia had a birthday. I found out through the grapevine. So we're going to sing happy birthday to Celia today, if we can. Join in with me. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Celia. Happy birthday to you. Congratulations. I'm not going to ask how old you are. You can tell me later if you want. So last week we looked at generosity when it comes to our relationships. And because we're a church that is relational and we celebrate communion together at the end of the service. So I want to invite you, if you're a guest with us, you can pick up a communion packet at the back if you want to do that with us at the end of the service today. But we've been talking about standing at the crossroads. And today I want to talk about relationships. And I'm not just talking about guys with girls or anything. It's about our relationships in general. More friendships, to be honest with you, in regards to this. But I've titled this message, "Why Can't We Be Friends?" I thought it would be a great title just to wake you up to what is he getting at? What is there about certain people that maybe we shouldn't be friends with or be on kind of aware of in our relationships. But we're looking at Proverbs, we're looking at Ecclesiastes, and there was one writer who wrote both of these books. They're called wisdom literature. Job is another one of those books as well. But Proverbs and Ecclesiastes were written by Solomon. And Solomon was the wisest person on earth. He was one who was asked, what, if anything, you could have anything in the world, what would you like? God asks him this in a dream, and he says, I choose wisdom. He didn't choose wealth. He didn't choose, to be stronger than his enemies. He chose wisdom. And so God was just, wow, gives him all the wisdom he can muster, plus he gave him wealth, plus he gave him power over his enemies. And so Ecclesiastes and Proverbs kind of speaks to us, and there's a lot of wisdom in these two books. That last week we talked about our wallets, and hey, can I just celebrate for a minute? I told you I got scammed. The wallet came. I got it. Hey, it's beautiful. You can have a look at it after. It was $80 after exchange. Not worth that much money, but hey, I got it. If you're here last week, you know what I was talking about. We're going to speak to relationships as well. And then next week, our words and then our choices. Every single day, you and I stand at a crossroads when it comes to our choices and when it comes to our relationships. And there's a path of wisdom that God wants us to take, but there's also a path of folly that kind of just feels easier. And so today, I want to talk about why we can't be friends. I've been learning to go to get some statistics so that we can make sure that we all understand that this lesson kind of hits everybody, depending on where you're at in your age. But recent statistics show that as of 2025, 13% of Canadians aged 15 and older say they feel lonely. Often, sometimes always. That's more than 1 in 10 of us, if you think about it. Now, among our young people, if you go to 15 to 24, that rate climbs to 17%. And then for adults 50 and older, that puts a lot of us in that camp. 50 and older, 43% are at high risk of social isolation, and 57% actually report feeling lonely. So, this is, I find, really fascinating because at the same time, where face-to-face time with friends has basically dropped off the map because a lot of our connections is done through social media now. Back in 1986, nearly half of Canadians, almost 48%, got together with friends on an average day. Well, today, by 2022, that number had dropped all the way down to just 19%. So almost from half down to 19%. And even when people do connect, whether it's virtually, those who rely only on like texting or FaceTime or WhatsApp, they report lower satisfaction with friendships and higher rates of loneliness. I'm just curious, why is that? Because the trends hit every generation, teens and young adults. I understand this tension, and it must be really difficult for you as you go through people's highlight reels on Instagram and Facebook. People are organizing their best times on Facebook or Instagram, and you're thinking, wow, everyone else is feeling so great and doing all so well. But that's not really the case. Most people are feeling unseen. Or maybe you're a working parent, and you're so busy right now because you're juggling your jobs, you're juggling kids, you have endless schedules that finding time to connect with someone face to face actually feels more like trying to add one more thing into your busy schedule already, and that you just simply don't have a lot of time for in this season of your life. And then seniors, we don't want to forget about you. As you get older, you may be watching your circles of friends kind of shrink. And the reason is because they're getting older, and maybe you've been to more funerals in the last little while of people you grew up with and were really close to. And that can feel like loss and loneliness and emptiness as well. But I think it's really crazy because everyone says that we are in the most connected times in history, yet many of us feel more alone than ever. So wherever you find yourself this morning, I think I tried to hit on everybody that's going to be in this audience today, trying to navigate the drama of school friendships or balancing family and work with little margin for real relationship, or wondering who will walk with you through the season of your life as you get older. I think this ache is real for all of us. The quiet question many of us carry is simple, and it's this question: who really has my back? Who really can I trust? And am I investing in the right people? So no matter how old you are or how young you are, I want to take you back for a moment to when you were a kid. Do you remember when you were growing up where your parents were fanatical at who you spent time with? Do you remember that? I mean, for some of your parents, they may have even switched schools because they weren't too happy about who you hung around with. Some of us got sent to Christian schools so that we would be around the right people, our parents thought. Or maybe you can remember a name of someone in your neighborhood that your parents said, do not play with so-and-so. I don't want you to be hanging around him. I don't want you to be hanging around his house. Actually, let's face it, I think our parents would have probably arranged our marriages if they could. Now, at the time, you thought it was ridiculous. You thought your parents were being too strict. But now you have kids, and you're worse. You're worse. You have electronic surveillance systems. You know where they are at all times. You're looking at their Facebooks. You're looking at their texts. Hey, you know what? You even got that phone tracker device so that you know where they are at all times. But why is that? I think it's because parents, we know this from experience. The friends and the kids that you choose to hang around with can shape the entire direction and the quality of your life. And that same truth doesn't stop when we grow up, does it? Who we spend time with and who we choose to date and who we decide to trust with our deepest thoughts and struggles, those relationships matter more than we think. And the Bible is great because it speaks directly into this. The man God used to write Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, his name was Solomon. He was King David's son, and he watched it all. Listen to what Solomon says about friendships. In Proverbs 18, verse 24, he says, "One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." Now, I know that a lot of us right now, as we read that, we're nodding our heads inside because we realize that's true. Maybe you see yourself or someone who was close to you when you hear that. And we've all had friendships in the past or relationships that we got into that we regret now, don't we? Now, Solomon continues to write in Ecclesiastes. And if you remember last week, I told you Ecclesiastes is kind of like Solomon looking back at his life and he's writing a journal. And so we almost get to read some of Solomon's journal here together. But he talks about relationships in Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. You probably heard this in a marriage ceremony sometimes. And I think sometimes we typically look at this and move it towards a relationship between a man and a woman. But I think it's really important. I think it's more friendships and that feeling of loneliness that we're all fighting against. I think this is where Solomon is trying to get at when he speaks in Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. And he says, "Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves." And then he says this line, "A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken." And so what I want to suggest in this, as we read this might be familiar to you, especially that last line, that Solomon's not just tossing out some nice proverb about teamwork or relationship between a husband and wife. Because right before these verses that I just read, in verse 8, he paints a heartbreaking picture of a man who has everything materially, but nothing relationally. He works endlessly, yet he has no one to kind of share his experiences with. And so Solomon now is just flipping the camera around and now having us take a look at ourselves. And he shows us what life would look like when we have good relationships. The two lie down together and keep warm. It's not only about being physically cold on a chilly night. Actually, the deeper part of this is it's about emotional and spiritual chill that we feel when we're feeling lonely. The cold that creeps in is when there's no one to share life's burdens or joys with. I had an experience yesterday, and it's funny because I texted someone I had to let someone know. My wife and I took our grandkids to the TELUS Science Center, and we had a great time with our grandkids. We came back to our vehicle, and I started it up, and it sounded like a tank. What on earth happened? I thought maybe my muffler got a hole in it while we were parked there, but I drove it home, loud as anything. When I got it home, I looked underneath. My catalytic converter was stolen. And you know what? I had to let somebody know. So I text someone and just let them know. I don't know why. I was with my wife, and you know what? Police reports, insurance claim, all that. What an interruption. But it was great to have friends to be able to text and let them know. Now, notice, Solomon deliberately escalates in this from 2 to 3. I find this fascinating because in the ancient world, a 3-strand rope was actually famously strong. far stronger than just two strands. And when Solomon brings this into this idea of relationships, he is trying to get us to understand something. Now, Jewish interpreters often saw the third strand as deep friendships and family, maybe even. But Christian readers, as time went on and centuries went on, see it as God himself woven in the middle. See, when two people walk together in friendship or in marriage or in partnership, and then you invite Jesus into that relationship, oh man, that bond becomes nearly unbreakable. So how do we take our friendships to something that's just kind of surfacey, to add that third strain in, and we help each other follow Jesus, and we become more and more like Jesus together? And I think this is where Solomon's trying to get us to see that that chord isn't just me and you, it's me plus you plus Jesus. And that third strand is what it gives us relationship resilience, because life is going to continually try to pull us apart. Again, I need to make sure that we understand Proverbs are principles. They're not promises. Hanging with wise people does not always guarantee that you will never struggle, but it sure tilts the odds in your favor. Because the things that make friendships wonderful are the very things that make them dangerous. I'm going to say that again. The things that make friendships wonderful are the very things that make them dangerous. Because we drop our guard with our friends, don't we? We crave acceptance. And so at the moment we start choosing what we'll accept, we open ourselves up to the power of influence. So I want you to think about this for a moment. I'll use smoking, for instance. When was the first time you tried smoking? Were you by yourself or were you with somebody? Or nobody takes that first risky step where it says, private property, no trespassing. Are you usually by yourself when you cross that line? Or are you with someone? I just want you to think of all the times you did something when you were with people that you regret now. Typically, you were with someone that you opened up yourself to and you trusted them. Or maybe it was you leading your friends astray. But there's a lot of addictive behaviors and hidden compromises and deepest regrets that are born in the middle of a crowd. And Solomon knew this from experience. See, Solomon had thousands of friends. He had palace parties, but he drifted far from God. For being the wisest person on earth, having the most wisdom of anybody, he didn't always choose the path that led to good things and blessings. He drifted far from God with foreign women. These were women who enticed him to follow their gods. Those so-called friends that he had didn't pull him back. So he married 700 women and had 300 concubines. So Solomon's life actually proves that you can be the smartest and the wisest guy in the room and still pick the wrong circle of friends. He even wrote a whole chapter about it. It's in Proverbs chapter 7, and it's really interesting because he's painting this picture of a father who's trying to give his son something to think about. And he paints this picture. I want to read it together. It's a story of a young, naive man walking down the street at night when a married woman dressed to seduce comes after him. I want you to listen to see how he paints this picture. And I know for a lot of us, we're going to read this and think, oh, he's talking about an adulterous affair and a seductive woman. But I think it's also, you can take it and this can be the way our friends are as well when they're leading us. It's a metaphor that he's using. And he paints himself into this story. He says, while I was at the window of my house, looking through the curtain, I saw some naive young men, and one in particular who lacked wisdom or lacked common sense. Actually, lacked common sense is something you're going to be able to help me out with in just a moment. We'll get some audience participation, and I'll share that in a second. That's why that's highlighted. He was crossing the street near the house of an immoral woman, strolling down the path by her house. It was at twilight in the evening as deep darkness fell. The woman approached him, seductively dressed and sly of heart. She was the brash, rebellious type, never content to stay at home. She is often in the streets and in the markets, soliciting at every corner. As Solomon continues this perfect metaphor, we see that this immoral woman begins to flatter this young, naive man and tells him, no one will know. She promises secrecy. She pulls him into her house, Solomon says, like an ox going to the slaughter. She promises secrecy. And Solomon says he followed her like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it was going to cost him his life. This chapter isn't just about sexual sin. It's a vivid picture of how toxic relationships and bad company slowly leads us away from the wisdom that God has for us in choosing the correct path. Listen to how he ends this account in Proverbs 7:24 through 27. So listen to me, sons, and pay attention to my words. Don't let your heart stray away toward her. Don't wander down her wayward path, for she has been the ruin of many. Many men have been her victims. Her house is the road to the grave. Her bedroom is the den of death. You know what's ironic here is Solomon is sharing from experience. And I love this. You've heard this before, that it's good to learn from our mistakes. Would you say yeah to that? You know, it's always good to learn from our mistakes. But I'll tell you something else. What's even better is learning from someone else's mistakes. And you get to learn from Solomon's mistakes here. Solomon was a man who decided somehow in his wisdom that 700 wives and 300 concubines was going to be something that would please the Lord. And eventually the consequences of that is his kingdom split into two later on. And even the wisest man who ever lived had to learn the hard way that you can know the truth, but actually putting the truth into practice, they're two separate things. So, Bruce, who cares? Who cares? What has this got to do with me today? Why do I have to learn from Solomon's mistakes? Let me give you one reason why. Because friends who aren't careful with their lives will not be careful with yours. See, friends who don't guard their own marriages most likely won't look out for yours. Friends who are irresponsible with money will also be irresponsible with your money. Friends who abuse their bodies won't mind if you abuse your body. Friends who cheat are going to feel a whole lot better if you're cheating along with them. And friends who break the law will feel a whole lot better if you break it with them. So, I thought this is a perfect time, and I hope that we can have fun together here for just another minute with does anyone know Jeff Foxworthy? A few? Okay. He's a comedian, and he became famous for this line at the end of his jokes that says, "You might be a redneck," and maybe you'll remember that. And so in the spirit of that, I just kind of thought this would be interesting. That, can you say with me, lacking common sense instead of "you might be a redneck"? Here's how it's going to go. If you catch yourself, you want me to sound like him for a minute? If you catch yourself pretending to be someone you're not around certain people, you might be lacking common sense. If you feel pressure to compromise on something that was never a temptation before, you might be lacking common sense. If you hear yourself saying, "I'll go, but I won't participate," you might be lacking common sense. 3 more. If you start hoping the people who love and care about you the most will never find out where you've been or who you've been with, you might be lacking common sense. If you feel the need to check your phone or your story before you walk in the door so that they don't see the real you, you might be lacking common sense. And if you're pulling slowly away from Jesus, if you're slowly pulling away from the people who have always pointed you towards Jesus, you might be lacking common sense. Thank you for your participation. I was not sure how that was going to go. But all kidding aside, the wisdom of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, it points us straight to the wisest man who ever walked this earth. And it's not Solomon. It's Jesus Christ. It's Jesus himself. Jesus embodied perfect friendship in a way that no one ever else will. I just want you to think about this. Think about the people he chose, his 12 disciples. He deliberately chose them to walk along with him. These weren't the religious elites. They were not polished professionals. They weren't voted most likely to succeed. He picked ordinary, everyday people, rough fishermen like Peter, Andrew, James, and John, who smelled like the sea, who spoke before they thought. A despised tax collector named Matthew, who was considered a traitor by his own people. A hot-headed political zealot named Simon, who wanted to overthrow Rome. And even a man named Judas, who he knew one day would betray him. They were impulsive, they were ambitious, they were doubting, they were fearful, and at times they lacked common sense. But Jesus didn't wait for them to get their act together. He called them friends, believe it or not, in John 15, verse 15. He spent 3 years eating with them, correcting them in love, forgiving them when they failed, and ultimately, he laid down his life for his friends. That's the kind of friendship Jesus offers us, and that's the kind of friendship that you want to find. It's not based on how impressive or put together we are, but how amazing his grace is. And he steps into our mess. He comes into our loneliness and our broken relationships. And he says, I choose you anyway. And something miraculous happens when we invite him as that third strand into our relationships. It's one of the reasons why relationships are one of the most powerful forces in kingdom living. The right one sharpens iron like iron sharpens iron. In his book, Practicing the Way, John Mark Comer says this: the church is where we are reparented into the family of God. It's scary because it regularly goes wrong. Now, when he said that line, I just thought, yeah, every one of us here, I'm sure, have many examples of where those relationships went wrong. See, our deepest wounds come from relationships. But did you know that so does our deepest healing? Our deepest healing comes from relationships. We're simply not meant to just follow Jesus alone. The radical individualism of our Western culture today is not only a mental health crisis and growing social catastrophe, he says, it's a death blow to any kind of serious formation into Christ-like love. Because it's in relationship that we're formed and forged. From coming together here on a Sunday morning, or eating together around a table, or practicing confession and repentance together, to entering into spiritual direction, therapy, or mentorship together. Community is actually how we travel the way of Jesus together. So my question for you guys this morning is, who are your traveling companions? Because we're all going to stand at the crossroads when it comes to our relationships. And Jesus has already chosen the path for us. He's shown us the path. He pursued us when we were far from him, and he sticks closer than a brother. He invites us into a family where teens have mentors who listen, adults have friends who speak truth and love, and seniors who are never left in isolation or on the sidelines. Those relationships don't make us just make life better. Actually, they form us into a people who look more like Jesus, is how he ends his quote. So this week, I just want to give you 3 things to consider, 3 practical steps that you can add in your life, no matter where you're at. But the first one is to audit your circle. Maybe it's time to make a short list of your 5 closest friends or influence and ask this question: are they pulling me toward Jesus or away from him? Because if it's true that a cord of 3 strands is hard to break, you want Jesus as part of your circle. So this is your crossroads moment. Do you want friends that are toxic and slowly pulling you away, or companions who help you stand firm? And then pursue one wise friend intentionally this week. Reach out to that person, someone maybe you respect. Maybe it's a mature believer, someone who's older than you, or someone farther down the road, and say, hey, can we just grab a coffee together? And if you don't drink coffee, a bubble tea. I don't know. I don't drink that stuff. But just something where you can get together around a table and just say, I want to learn from you. Find that mentor or coach or someone you look up to. Parents, find that couple doing marriage well, someone who's maybe had kids that are now have kids of their own, and you admire their marriage. Seniors, invest your wisdom into the next generation. Because a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And then the last one. This is my favorite line. I don't know why this has always stuck with me from my dating relationships, and I've never forgot this, into even my friendships. And I always talk about this, but here it is. Be the person you're looking for is looking for. Be the person you're looking for is looking for. In other words, be the friend that Proverbs describes. In Proverbs 17:17, it says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. We need someone like that in our lives. Learn to speak truth in love, but, and here's the big but, not until you have listened with everything you've got. Show up when it's hard. Be the kind who sticks closer than a brother. Because someone in this room needs exactly that in their season of life right now. And I believe that if we do these 3 things, we're not going to be perfect. But we will move from isolation or from those toxic ties that may be pulling us away from Jesus to a kind of friendship that echoes into eternity. So we're going to have a time of communion to remember the greatest friend we will ever have and to experience Jesus together. So if you have not already, you can grab a communion packet at the back. I want us, before we leave this room today, to remember that the Lord invites us to remember the greatest friendship that we have ever known. Jesus just didn't talk about the kind of friends we should have. He became the friend we all need. He stepped into our loneliness. He called us friends. And he actually laid down his life so we could be woven together with him as the unremarkable 3rd strand in our lives. So, at this time of communion, we're not just going through some religious motion. We're remembering the friend who sticks closer than a brother, the one who invites us, every one of us, teens, parents, seniors, into the kind of relationship that feels warm when it's freezing out, lifts us when we fall, and strengthens us when we feel overpowered. Jesus says, I am with you. You don't have to walk this alone. So I want you to just take a quiet moment right now and just thank Jesus for the way he's pursued you as a friend. Just ask him to make you the kind of friend who reflects his love to people around you this week. And be the person you're looking for. Let's go to God in prayer and thank him for the bread at this time. Jesus, thank you for being the friend who sticks closer than a brother. You've walked into our loneliness so that we would never have to walk alone. Father, help us choose wise companions and be the kind of friend who reflects your love. And Father, I want a friend, we all want friends who keep you as the third strand in every relationship. And we pray this through your Son, Jesus. Amen.